6 rusted bicycles, potato peelers, glass chandeliers, bowling balls, cameras, the top of a horse-drawn carriage, 3 dressmaking dummies, old broken beds, 14 pianos, a car, 8 cats, 25,000 books, 6 accordions, 4 cookers. And that's just the start. What are you hiding in your house? Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Okay, hi, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. It's Barry. Lovely to be podcasting to you again. Thanks for getting in touch, if you have, about the special episode that I'm going to be doing. And get in touch, you did. There was no shortage of people who wanted to get in touch, so thank you all very much. Thank you if you have joined the Facebook group and become an official extra. I welcome you with open arms. Similarly, I feel like I talk about the Facebook group a lot, but similarly, if you listen to the podcast and you get in touch with me through Instagram or Twitter, I appreciate that just as much because there's a lot of love going on Instagram and on Twitter. So I'm not going to do a big long list of shout outs. I'm just going to do a few before we get to the stories in this episode. So first of all, can I say hello to Rhett Hall? Now Rhett is the co-founder of the Brain Trust Brothers podcast. That's a great sort of network and they help to support lots of podcasts. So hello Rhett. Julia Owen, Ridley Scott, and Haman said hello to all of you. But there is someone I do have to say hello to. I'm so annoyed at this. A man whose name I got wrong last week. I hate that. I fucking hate it. Because I really hate it when people get my name wrong. So rather than just apologise, I'd rather just fix that now and just say I'm really sorry that I got your name wrong. Sometimes people do get my name wrong and I occasionally get a Brian. Sometimes I get a Gary. I've had a few Harrys and once I got a Barney. So I want to fix the fact that I said hello to Johnny Domingo when I meant Jimmy Domingo. Hello, Jimmy. Sorry that I got your name wrong. Are you ready to hear some stories? 2 in this episode. Okay, let's go. This is the story of Homer and Langley Collier. Born in the 1880s, but their story, it rose to fame in the 1940s in New York. Who were they? Homer and Langley Collier were born to parents Susie and Herman. So Herman, their dad, he was a gynecologist. And now he was known to be eccentric. Amongst the medical community, he was known to be fascinated with sort of strange experiments and always wanting to kind of delve into the weird elements of medicine. And he kept lots of human organs in jars in his office. Lovely. Lovely Herman. Now, their mother, Susie, she was an opera singer. And by all accounts, a fairly successful opera singer. She did well in New York. She had lots of gigs. And she made a pretty good career out of this. Herman would tell people that his family, the Colliers, were one of the oldest families in New York. The heritage, I believe, is that his father had come from England, not on the Mayflower, but on the second wave of people travelling to New York. So the brothers were born 4 years apart. Homer was the elder of the two, Langley being the younger. So the main photographs, right, that you see of them, they come from much later on in their life when they become much more well known. And I'll get to why they become well known. But these are the main kind of photographs. Couldn't really find anything that was like a family photograph of them all, or even a photograph when the kids were young. I couldn't really find any of that stuff. So essentially, you're just looking at photographs of them as older. So to describe them, Homer, the elder of the two, he sort of looks a bit like a cartoon of the time. Like if you could imagine what someone in, say, 1902 growing up in New York might look like. He's got like a really thick moustache, he's got heavy eyebrows, he's a wee tiny bit overweight, and he's always wearing one of those flat caps. You know, one of those kind of like, he just looks like a regular guy of the time. Now Langley looks, in a nutshell, like Albert Einstein. And I'm not even joking. If this was today and there was a celebrity lookalike competition, Langley would win it. He looks like Albert Einstein. He's got the exact same eyebrows, the exact same tash. His face is the exact same. When I started looking at this story, I was like, did they know Albert Einstein? What the fuck's going on here? And then I was like, oh no, it's just actually that Langley looks incredibly like him. So, the family, mum, dad, and the two sons, at first they live in quite a small apartment in New York. And they're living in the Harlem area. But they're a wealthy family. The Colliers, there's money involved in that family. They come from a long line of people who had great wealth. And so the boys, they went to expensive schools and they went to good universities. Homer was a lawyer and he was considered a bit of a prodigy. He'd achieved well in school. He got his bachelor's degree at age only 20, which is pretty good. And he was a really bright guy. There's an interesting description of him at one point that comes up where someone says, Homer was very bright, perhaps too bright. Not sure entirely what that means, but okay, perhaps too bright. Langley, the younger of the brothers, he did chemistry and engineering. But there is a bit of doubt around whether or not he actually finished college or even went to college. I don't know. The whole thing is a little bit muddy. The college that he says he attended have no record of him ever being there. And it's said that his dad tried to buy his degree, buy his education in some way. Whatever happened there, I don't really know. But with Langley, what we do know is that he went on to be a concert pianist and he did really, really well. He played loads of the major New York venues, and he played for some really famous people. Neither of the brothers ever married. They lived with their parents, even as adults. So when the family were a little bit older, they moved into a 4-story brownstone mansion in Harlem, New York. And at the time, Harlem was considered a very wealthy area. A really wealthy place to live. Now it's already a wealthy area, and this family can afford to be buying a 4-story mansion within it. So they're doing well. They're doing really well. As a family, they were quiet. They kept themselves to themselves. They would go to church and they would be seen in the local shops. They were polite. They were respectable. People in the neighbourhood knew who this family were, and everything was fine. Things started to change in 1919 when Herman, the father, he moves out of the mansion and he moves into his own small property. Why? Well, this has never been documented. He just leaves his wife and the 2 sons behind in the big house. I don't really know why Herman left. I mean, perhaps the marriage was failing. Perhaps he was having an affair. Perhaps he was having a breakdown. I don't know. But for some reason, Herman moves out and into a new property. So this leaves the 2 sons, Homer and Langley, living with their mum. Not long after Herman had moved out, he dies. And he leaves all of his money and all of his belongings to his 2 sons. And that was a lot of possessions he had. He has a lot of stuff. And he leaves it all to his sons. So 10 years later, they're living with their mum. And she dies, and they're left with the house and everything that she has left behind. So they've now inherited everything from their parents. Now, what they've inherited is a considerable wealth, a 4-story brownstone apartment, but also a lot of belongings. After the death of their mother, they continued going about their life. They would go to work. They would go out to high society parties, see friends. They would open up their home and entertain all of their friends and all the people that they worked with and all the people that they knew. And now I can get that. If I had this house, if I had a 4-story brownstone, it would be party central. I'd be like, everyone round to Barry's, come on, let's go, party at Barry's house. If I had that kind of house, yeah, I'd be holding parties. I'd be doing that. After a while, with the 2 of them, those things started to slow down. They started seeing people less and less. They started going to work less and less. And instead, they were spending more and more time in their house. So Homer, unfortunately, he began to lose his sight. Gradually at first, it just began to go bit by bit. Now eventually, he would lose his sight entirely. By the point that he had lost his sight entirely, the brothers had stopped any kind of socialising. And they had both entirely stopped going to work. Langley, he left his job to look after his brother. Now something else was about to change massively, and that was the area that they lived in. So they're living in Harlem, and at the time, Harlem was just filled with rich white people. That's what it was full of. People who had money, people who owned property, and that was about to change. It started to become, I guess, the Harlem that we would kind of recognise nowadays. The Great Depression had hit, and lots of these rich white people who owned these big properties, they just couldn't afford them anymore. So they had to get out and go and live somewhere else in New York, or even leave New York and just go and find another place to live in. And so very quickly during that period of time, lots of new developments were thrown up very quickly. Lots of new blocks of flats, lots of new housing. And without dragging us into a racial conversation, the fact is, at that time, what happened was those white people said that they were pushed out by this diversity that was happening in the neighbourhood. And it brought about something that set the two brothers on the craziest journey that they're just about to undertake. Now, there was an attempted robbery on their home, and this caused them to both become quite paranoid and quite obsessed with the idea of an intruder coming into their house. They became obsessed by the idea that someone would come into the house and go through their belongings and their property. At the same time, the two brothers, they were a big fascination in the area, because people had started to think, who are these two strange brothers living in this house? And they used to be a part of the community, and now no one was ever really seeing either of the brothers. So kids would go up and they would do the old chap runaway, or I don't know what other people call it. I know it as chap runaway, where you go up, knock the door and wait for someone to come out and no one was there. Or, like people were trying to do things like climb up the side of the building just to kind of get a wee look inside and see what was going on inside with these two brothers. Pretty sure every neighbourhood has got people like this, or we all kind of recognise those kind of figures, don't we? That are like the sort of people that, I mean, it's terrible to think about it now. It's actually horrible to think about, because I think back to my childhood, right? So growing up in the village, we had Nettie and Norman. Now, Nettie and Norman are legendary in the little town that I grew up in. And Nettie, I think, does Nettie come from, where does that name come from? I think it comes from Agnes, does it? That's weird. I can't really remember, but anyway, she was called Nettie. Nettie was the mother. Norman was the son. And at one point, they did have a father, a husband, in that family dynamic. And the husband died. So Nettie and Norman became this kind of, like, I remember first sort of being introduced to them when I was like 8 or 9 years old. Now, Norman looked like Vincent van Gogh. He had a full-on ginger beard. He had the ginger hair. He wore a suit all the time. Like, he was never not out of a suit. Nettie was never seen as far as I can remember when I was young, she was never seen out of her dressing gown. She would always be wearing her house coat all the time. And they were, what I was told at 9 years old, crazy. They were just crazy. They lived in a house that Nettie would not let people into. She was fiercely against anybody entering into this house that her and her adult son lived in. And occasionally you would see Norman kind of walking about the town, and he'd get on the bus sometimes and he'd be going somewhere. But as lovely as a man as Norman was, and he was lovely, he would talk, you had to stand a massive distance away because he smelled so bad. It was, I remember being young and being like, that is awful. And yeah, it's one of those situations again where you just go, there's massive mental health going on here. These people are going through huge mental health issues. What you're going to come to understand about these brothers is that the mental health in them goes so far. It goes so far. And were there people in place to deal with that? No, not really. In the case of Nettie and Norman, sorry, I'll stop going on about them now, but in the case of them, people did try to intervene, and there were people who were allowed into the house eventually as Nettie got older. But those people just came out with horrific stories of what was in the house and just how grim it was. Oh, living in there, the filth that they lived in, the control that Nettie had over everything, and yeah. And they're both dead now, and you know, God bless them. God bless Nettie and Norman, because they never really had anything. You know what I mean? They were the kind of people who never really had much in life to start with. But they also had mental health issues to deal with that no one was really equipped to help them with at the time. And it just made the situation worse. So, as much as a 9-year-old, I thought it was dead funny to run up to Nettie and Norman's house and knock on the door, or, you know, try and like throw a snowball at their window. I look at them now as an adult and I think, God bless them. God bless them both. You know what I mean? At least they had each other. At least they had each other. In their madness, they had each other. So, in the Collier brothers' house, it was dark because the brothers had stopped paying their electricity bills. They'd stopped paying their gas bills and their phone bill. Now, Homer's health was continuing to fail. He was completely blind, and he started to develop rheumatism, and he couldn't move very well at all. But Langley wanted to look after him. He didn't like the idea of his brother being taken to a hospital. He didn't want that. He wanted his brother at home. So he did everything he could to make his brother the most comfortable. So in the house, Homer had an area that was his. He sat in his chair. He had a table either side of him, and Langley would bring him everything that he thought his brother would need at that time, rather than actually invite a doctor into the house or ask for any help. He thought he just wanted to look after his big brother. Now, the idea of being stolen from, or the idea that their house was under some kind of threat, was such a big obsession with the brothers. And this is what Langley did to combat that. He would go into the street and he would find any piece of junk that he could find. Old mattresses, heaters, broken furniture, boxes from shops, papers, anything at all that he could find, he would bring it back up to the house. He and Homer were under the belief that if they could fill the house with enough stuff, they could protect it. Now, the logic there is just nothing short of bizarre. Let's try and protect bricks and mortar by filling it with all of the shit that we can find. So, taking this even further, Langley felt this might not even be enough to just fill the house with all of the junk that he could find on the street. It wasn't enough. He started to set up booby traps all around the house. He would create these things that hung from the ceiling which contained rocks, so that if an intruder was to come into the house, the rocks would fall on them. He knew the position of all of these things around the house, but he sealed up all of the entrances with booby traps so that a burglar who would come in would be hurt and that they would be aware that a burglar had come in to the house. It's all very Home Alone vibes. It's all very set a trap here and there. But actually, I don't even really think that's too far from the truth. He set up some crazy booby traps all around every entrance to the house. There were things I know I was laughing there when I said it's very Home Alone vibes, but it was a lot like that. He would have nails hanging out of a wall so that if a burglar had to come through a certain entrance, they would be scraped in the face with a nail. He really was the both of them were at this point just so convinced that someone was going to try and break into this house. When Langley came home every night, he would have to push through the main door for about 10 minutes, and that is because behind it there was just the biggest pile of junk. So he would have to push and push and push through that door, get through it, and then, once inside, realign all of the junk that was behind it. And I'm talking junk that reached further than the door. It went up higher. So he'd get ladders and he would go up and he would make sure that this was absolutely secure and that this was absolutely fine. Fuck's sake, it's just crazy, isn't it? Now, I said that they had stopped paying their bills, but the major bill that they were defaulting on was their mortgage. So, as well as the 4-storey house that they lived in, and remember I did tell you how rich these brothers were, they had at some point before all of this bringing junk into the house began, they had actually bought the building across the street, just across the street from them. It was empty and they saw this as an investment opportunity. They thought this place would become great apartments in time. So not only are they living in this amazing mansion, they also own the one across the road. But the problem was they weren't paying for either. They weren't paying the mortgage on either of these properties. So it didn't take long for debt collectors to come to their house and ask for the money or threaten them with repossession. But Langley, he argued and he argued. And eventually, debt collectors, they left. They said, fine, this is an issue you will just need to take up with the courts because you're not paying for A, the property you're living in, B, the property that you own across the road. So, fine, fuck it, take it up with the courts. So now people in the neighbourhood, they started to hear that the brothers, who they were already fascinated with, owned both of these properties. And a rumour started to spread that both brothers were basically inside of their house, sitting on piles of cash. Just sitting on thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pounds of money. If only the people actually knew it was junk. They weren't sitting on piles of cash. They were just surrounded by any old junk off of the street. So eventually, Langley's done his best to keep the debt collectors away and ward all of that off, but it's not enough. The house is to be repossessed. And when the repossession company come to the property, oh, what a shock they are in for. Just to give you a flavour, in the house there were 14 pianos. There was a fully built car. There were 25,000 books. There were broken beds. There was old food. There were newspapers that had been kept for a decade. There were jars everywhere. There was fabric. There was dressers, wardrobes. Every floor of the house was filled from floor to ceiling with junk. There were, in that 4-storey house, 140 tons of junk. And this is what the brothers were living in. The only way to get around the house was to travel through the really intricate system of tunnels that Langley had built. So the stuff in the house was piled so high that Langley had actually created these strange tunnels that connected one room to the next. And in some cases, you would actually have to go through a fireplace, come out the back of it, and go through into a tunnel just to come out to find anything on the other side. That, I know it sounds like I'm trying to exaggerate this. I will post images of this and you will not believe it. Floor to ceiling junk. It just got higher and higher and bigger and bigger. So within this, okay, you have Homer. Now Homer is blind and his rheumatism has paralysed him. So he basically has what police eventually call the nest. And the nest is, Homer had a chair, he had 2 tables either side, he had a little bit of space around him, but essentially he was still surrounded by lots of this stuff. But this was his little area. So he stayed there day and night. And what happened was that Langley would just bring him food and then he'd go through using the tunnel system in the house. Because Langley built this. I mean, he built this. Homer was in that chair, blind. He knew that his brother was building this in the house, but he didn't know, of course, he didn't know how to get in and out all of those little intricate tunnel systems. But Langley knew they were the systems that he had set up. So when the house is being repossessed, what does Langley do? He pulls out his checkbook and he writes a cheque for the remainder of the mortgage on the house. Because they always had the money. That's the thing to always remember. They always had the money to get out of this. They always had the money to get away from this situation, but they chose to stay there. So police and the repossession company, they're dealing with Langley. But where's Homer? Knowing that Homer can't leave the house, police demand to see him. It takes police half an hour to climb through the junk, make their way through the tunnels, and find Homer. So they find him and he is in bad shape. He's malnourished, he's filthy. He's basically been in the same spot for so long. His hair and his beard have grown really wild. Police talk to him and they ask him if he's okay. And he says he's fine. He just wants them to get out and leave him and his brother alone. Now that's exactly what police do. They determine that, well, no crime is really being committed here. Although the house is beyond bizarre, now that the mortgage is being paid off by Langley, there's actually little that they can really do. Now this was the 1940s, and I'd hope that a mental health service would step in nowadays if this was happening. But I maybe think them back then, maybe there wasn't the service. Maybe people just didn't know actually what to do. So the brothers, they're left to it. They carry on as they were. By now, people start to know that the house is full of junk. And really all that does is it creates more curiosity in people. So there's a photo of Langley, and I find this a really sad image. He's looking out the window, and I think he's on like the second story of the house, and there's nearly 1,000 people on the street looking up at him. And they're just regular people, but they're swarming around the property to try and get a look at it. Or because they've heard the story of the two crazy brothers that live inside. And I feel sad when I look at that image, because I feel like he's looking out and going, this is my life. Why are you all looking up at me? What do you all want? So what Langley does is he pays the telephone bill so that they can get reconnected. And he calls police regularly to tell them that there's people in the street, there's people trying to break in, there's people throwing rocks. And the police come out as often as they can, and they talk to Langley, and they try and reassure him that actually no, a lot of these things aren't really happening, and he says no, they are. But see, at this time, there's a lot of images of police like sort of smiling about this. You'll see these images of like when they first were able to take some stuff out of the house. There's a lot of smiling, and it was all like a bit like it was a bit of a big joke. It was kind of a bit of a, I don't know, bit of a let's have a laugh at these two crazy brothers. And I don't know, I guess for me it's that idea of like going, maybe it's the time, maybe they didn't know how to really deal with that kind of stuff that's going on, or let's look at the two crazies that are living in this house, and that's kind of fun for people to laugh at and look at and whatever. And I just find that a wee bit odd. It's a bit like I've got a friend who really despises any of these programs that are about anyone who's poor and the terrible circumstances that they live in. What is the term for it? I think it's like, is it poor poor porn. You know, you get like food porn. So you get like all these like cooking shows and all that, and it's all like, oh, food porn. But this is like known as like poor porn. And that idea of like, let's all sit in our lovely houses and we'll laugh on TV at people who live in these situations. And I don't know what this was. And this was crazy porn. I don't know what the hell this was. I don't know what the hell was going on at the time, but it's just, I mean, I know it was the 1940s, but that can't always be an excuse. Well, it was the 1940s and I'm still talking about it in 2018 because it's still so bonkers. So someone should have done something at the time. Now they get classified as hoarders. And I think that's an okay term to apply to these two brothers. I think that's okay. But they were hoarding for a very particular reason. They were hoarding because of protection. They wanted to protect the property that they lived in. And hoarding is a deviation of OCD. And it feels a bit like sometimes these things, partly this is why I podcast, is because I want to understand these things. Without trying to sound like a wanker saying this, I just want to understand what it means to be human. I want to understand all of the nuances. I want to get to the bottom of all of the little things that differentiate obsession from OCD. I want to know what makes a murderer from a psychopath. I want to know the whole... I just want to know everything. I just want to know everything, and that's not possible. But hopefully, through podcasting, maybe I will. Maybe I'll get myself a bigger understanding of the world. And maybe through the stories that I'm bringing, maybe you might understand some things you hadn't thought about before. Who knows? Anyway, so this sort of line between who's a hoarder, what's OCD. When I looked into this, the symptoms of hoarding are cluttered living spaces, the inability to discard any items, the difficulty to manage daily activities, and the difficulty to just organise items in your life. Also, excessive attachment to possessions, and the inability to let others borrow your possessions, and limited or no social interactions. Now, there is a lot of junk in this house, okay? And there's a lot of newspapers, and the newspapers were there for a very good reason. I find the reason incredibly, incredibly sad. Langley had a belief that he should keep collecting newspapers and bring every newspaper that he could find into the house. And I'm talking, when you see these images, I'm talking thousands and thousands of bundled newspapers dating back 12 years. He'd been collecting these for so long, but he kept these because he truly believed that his brother Homer, he would get his sight back and that he would want to read these newspapers. I think there's something in that that's really touching. He also believed, Langley believed, that he could cure his brother's rheumatism. And he thought he could do this with food. So he basically fed his brother, who was stuck in his chair, a diet of oranges, peanut butter and bread. Police received an anonymous call to say there was a strange smell coming from inside of the Collier brothers' property. Now, I can't imagine it ever smelled that nice with all that shit inside of it. I can't believe it ever smelled that nice, but an anonymous call comes in to say that there's a terrible, terrible smell. So police jump to the conclusion that it's the smell of a dead body. When they arrive to check this out, they have real trouble getting through the door, and you'll remember that I told you behind the door there's just junk piled up against it. So it takes them 30 minutes to get through the door. They decide that they have to get inside. So they start to break down the door and they start just throwing property out any way that they can. They just start to get rid of stuff. They start throwing it out into the street because they can smell something inside the property and they think this needs to be investigated. So they go in, and what they think that they're looking for is probably Homer's body. And they have to go through all of Langley's tunnels. They have to crawl very slowly through all of his tunnels, and eventually they find Homer. And when they find him, he's dead. He's been dead for 12 hours. And the police look at him and they think, what's killed him is starvation, or possibly a heart attack. So they're in the property, but where is Langley? Well, they can't find him. Now, finding anybody and anything in that property would be near impossible, but they can't find Langley. So what they do is they station someone at the house just in case Langley's not at home and will return. So they station a police officer there. They leave him there. Time comes, time passes. Langley does not appear. So what police do next is they launch a manhunt. Across 10 states, they launch a huge search for Langley Collier. Of course, what happens is fake tips. Lots of people, I saw him in a shop, or I saw him in the street, and nah, bullshit. None of these people had actually seen him. So now weeks pass. Langley is nowhere to be found. And the time comes for Homer's funeral. The day of the funeral comes and Langley doesn't show up. And I think that's heartbreaking. They'd lived their whole life together. Langley had given himself to looking after his brother. And the day of Homer's funeral comes and Langley isn't there. So now police have got to decide what they're going to do. The manhunt for Langley, it hasn't turned him up. And they begin to wonder, is he actually in the property, buried under some junk? So the decision is made that the house needs to be emptied. It takes hundreds of people. It takes days. But level by level, the 4-storey mansion is beginning to be cleared. All of the junk, everything that's been collected over a decade, it's coming out. The pictures on the street at this point are unbelievable because any small item that they could find, they were just chucking it out on the street. They just needed everything out of the property because they needed to know if Langley was somewhere in that building. People came to watch this. The photographs are insane. People are on the street trying to actually catch stuff that's being thrown out of the house. People just wanted a piece of this property because it had become so well known. Now on the second floor, they begin to move away piles of old fabric. They start moving it aside and they see a body part. They see a foot sticking out. This foot belonged to Langley, and this was Langley's dead body. Tragically, what had occurred is that Langley was crawling through one of the tunnels that he himself had created. He was bringing his brother some food, and the tunnel had collapsed in on top of him. Now, it led police to theorise that their first assumption that Homer had died of starvation was correct. He'd sat in his chair, they believed, for 10 days with no food. Because Langley was only, and this is tragic, he was only 12 foot away from his brother. And he had a tray of food. But the tunnel, which had been made of suitcases, sheets of metal, it had fallen in on him as he tried to get to his brother. Once Langley's body was out and removed, the house was declared structurally unsound, and it was cleared entirely. Every single thing that was in that house was taken out of it, and it was left an empty shell. When the brothers died, they had around $9,100,000 in the bank, which today would be around $1 million. The term Collier's Mansion still gets used to describe a house where a hoarder lives. In the end, there were 23 distant family members who all came forward and received what was left of the Collier brothers' money. Any belongings that could have been saved from the house, they were auctioned off, and the money was put towards a small, very tiny park in Harlem, New York, called Collier Park. The house was demolished, and the tiny park that I just talked about, it stands in the area where the mansion once stood. And so ends the story of the Collier brothers. Okay, well, so that's that story. In another episode, I looked at obsession, and it was in a sort of different way. I looked at stalking, I looked at, people who become so obsessed by something that they can't let it go, but all of this lives in the same world. It's such a fascinating subject to me. I mean, you'll have your obsessions. I've got mine. And I think we all know people in life who've got obsessions, and sometimes maybe they don't even know they've got these obsessions. People who have behaviours that you're looking at and they think it's their day-to-day life. They don't really recognise it. But from the outside, you're looking at it and thinking, that's an odd behaviour that you have. It's in us all. It's in us all somewhere to be obsessed and to be OCD. We know we've all got the levels in us. We know that because we hear it all the time. We've all got a level of OCD. We've all got this. We've all got whatever, but I just think it's just really interesting when you're given a really extreme story, a very extreme example, kind of like what I do with this is like I'm working backwards and then going, I'm not a hoarder. I don't really think I've got many obsessive things that I do in my life. I don't know. Yeah, okay, well, it's worth thinking about for yourself. I'm going to shut up because I'm babbling on like a nutter. Okay, I'm going to tell you this next story. This is the story of Samantha Hancox, and Samantha was 10 years old when her grandmother died. Now, it had a really profound effect on Samantha. Up until the point of her grandmother's death, she had displayed no signs of any kind of unusual or strange behaviour. She was your happy-go-lucky 10-year-old, only concerning herself with the things that a 10-year-old would concern themselves with. She was an only child. She was born to Ken and Marion Hancox in 1972, and they lived in a place called Tipton in England. Now, the 10-year-old Samantha, when her grandmother died, she got it into her head that what had killed her grandmother was the going in to hospital. Not the illness that her grandmother had suffered, but it was the event of going in to hospital. Samantha's parents, they did their absolutely best to explain to her that this wasn't the case. Her grandmother was always going to die. She was ill, but Samantha wouldn't buy it. 10 years old, she started to believe that what happened was her grandmother had come into contact with some germs, and that is what had killed her. Now, it was soon after this that she started to show some signs of obsessive self-cleaning. She'd wash her hands repeatedly. She was concerned about coming into contact with people, coming into contact with any kind of outside germs. By the age of 14, Samantha's obsession had taken such a bad turn, she had to leave school. She couldn't sit her exams. She had to come home and be cared for by her parents. Now bear this in mind, right? As we go on, and I'll tell you this story. Our parents tried to reach out. They tried to get Samantha help. Now this would be, I'm reckoning, let me think, she was born in 72. Let me think. I'm going to reckon she was, this would be the mid to late 80s. Mid to late 80s, I'd reckon. Yeah. Kind of time I was like dancing around my room to some Whitney Houston songs and like, I was really like kicking my, legs up and dancing to music. Anyway, but no real help was available for Samantha. Our parents were a bit frustrated because they kept asking their local doctor, can you help? And she talked to a couple of doctors, but all they did was they prescribed her sedatives or just something that would help her relax, but that wasn't really working. That wasn't really getting to the root of the problem. So she was needing care from her parents for 24 hours a day because she was absolutely terrified of the idea of cooking. She felt that exposure to germs would kill her, and she just couldn't allow that. She was scared to come into contact with other people outside of her family because she was terrified of what she might pick up. This continued for years. By the age of 25, Samantha would not leave the house. The next time she would ever leave her parents' house, tragically, would be when she's dead. Samantha had begun to shower excessively. Now at first it was 3, 4 times a day, and it began to increase. And it went up to 10 times a day. Samantha eventually ended up showering 20 times a day. Her skin had become severely infected from the amount that she was showering, and her parents tried everything to stop her, but they couldn't. She was obsessed with the idea of having to have a shower. Our parents said this is the worst period that she went through in her illness. And they tried, my God, they tried to reach out to mental health services. And people came to the house, right? People listened and they came to the house. But they had to sit, because Samantha insisted on it, at a distance from Samantha. And they talked to her. And they gave her advice. But no advice, no therapy was working. She just wouldn't listen. So there comes a point when her dad has to go into hospital for a sort of small operation. But this small operation for him, unfortunately, is the beginning of the end for Samantha. She just could not cope with the idea that her dad was going into hospital and the germs that he would bring back, the germs that he would get into contact with. So she begged him not to go to hospital. And he said, I have to have this operation. So she gave him rules, and she said, when you're there, don't touch anything that you don't need to touch. Do not go into the lift, because that's where all the germs are. If you're pressing the same buttons as other people in a hospital, that's where they are. And he did it. He did his very best to not touch anything he didn't need to, and to not go into a lift, because he knew how much it meant to Samantha. When he came out of hospital, the stress of him going in had really taken its toll on Samantha, and she'd all but given up eating. She'd eat a wee tiny slice of pizza here and there, but she'd begun to think that all food was tainted with germs, and so she couldn't eat anything. She got to the point where, when her parents left the house, they had to change clothes when they came back in from what they were wearing outside, because she was so convinced that they were bringing in germs. And they did this to accommodate her. If Samantha ever thought that a piece of clothing or an item or a belonging had come into the house and it might have been tainted with germs, the family would have to burn it in the fire. Our parents began to feel that Samantha was starting to give up. She was losing battle with her obsessive behaviour. And they wrote to every health facility that they could find, begging for help. The help came. They talked to Samantha. She had one very, very brief visit to a psychiatric ward, but she was back within a day. So nothing was working. One evening, Samantha's mum, she brought her food, and Samantha didn't touch it. She apologised to her mum for not eating the food. And in that moment, her mother says she saw something different in her daughter's eyes. She said in that moment when she apologised for not eating the food, it was like she was apologising for everything. It was the following day her mother and her father would find Samantha dead in the armchair that she spent most of her time in. She was 40 years old. They immediately called police. But when police arrived and pronounced Samantha dead, her parents were arrested for manslaughter. Police believed that they had let her die, that they had allowed this to happen. After 7 hours of separate questioning, police believed that the couple had enough of a cohesive story not to proceed with any further charges. And so they were left to bury Samantha. What a horrible story. It's odd. I guess you could pull at any obsessive compulsive disorder story, and be it Samantha, be it the brothers, and you could go back and you can say, well, what happened? What was it that happened at the one point that they couldn't recover from? We sort of know the root of it with Samantha. Her gran died. What was the root of it with the brothers? Was it their dad leaving? Was it their mum dying? Was it fearing the loss of what they had? Who knows? Or was it that actually in these stories, this was always going to be the narrative for these people? For the brothers? For Samantha? That was just going to be their story. And so what we like to do is look back and try and pinpoint a moment and blame it on that. Who knows? And yeah, we've all got the old OCD in us. We've all got the levels of obsession and compulsion and, and maybe it's about control. And this is my thought. Maybe it's that as humans, we're just actually terrified to lose control. We're absolutely so petrified when our world changes. And maybe that's what it is with these two. So the death of a grandmother, the death of a parent, that's where the world changes. And so everything that you feel about that manifests itself in something else. Your world gets rocked. Your world is moved. And so you begin to develop these obsessions because you can't quite deal with it. Now, if you are someone who has been through the death of someone close to you or the death of, and you've not gone through that, that might be a hard idea to understand. Because I can say I've been through the death of people in my life and I've never gone to obsessive compulsive. But perhaps these people were just, maybe that's the way that it was going to be for them. Maybe that's just the world that they lived in. I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry. That was two pretty grim tales. But they are worth sharing. They're worth sharing. Can't all be laughs and jokes. Has to be real. Okay? You know what I'm going to say, because I say it at the end of every single episode. If you want to get in touch, and I know you do, if you want to get in touch, where can you find me? Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. imagine from the look on his face. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over.